Welcome back to Baby Jail Unlocked, the podcast where we peel back the layers of common early childhood and education practices and ask, what's really going on here? I'm your host, Dr. Chloe Keegan, and today I'm going to be joined by Clare Devlin. Clare began her career as a foundation stage teacher before becoming a primary and early years advisor with her local authority in 1999. As Director of Programmes with Early Years, the Organisation for Young Children 2007 to 2009, Clare played a pivotal role in developing the Sure Start developmental programme for 2 and 3-year-olds in Northern Ireland. Then, since 2009, Clare has worked independently as a trainer, consultant and mentor, supporting primary and early years educators to transform their observation and play practice to ensure that no child is left behind. Combining online and in-person formats, Clare supports schools and organisations with research-driven training focused on creative and critical thinking. Her expertise includes observing, documenting, assessing and planning for children's critical thinking and learning. And then in 2021, she joined Outdoors Thinking as an associate trainer, further advancing her commitment to quality outdoor learning. And I'm very excited to say a book is in the pipeline. So we will discuss all of this and so much more in this episode of Baby Jail Unlocked. Clare, thank you so much for joining us today. We are really looking forward to getting into a lot of the work that you're doing. I've touched on a little bit about your background with being a foundation stage teacher and, your work that you're doing in the outdoors. So we've lots to cover. But I do want to firstly just get a sense of you, where you started in this, originally as a foundation teacher and what that kind of involved.
So, Chloe, thanks for inviting me on. I started back in 1988, so that's given away a lot there. Started off as a foundation stage teacher and loved what I did, just loved my job. Foundation stage here in the north of Ireland is year 1 and 2, which is our 4 to 6-year-olds. So I really worked with 4 to 6-year-olds all the time. Sometimes I worked with 3 to 4s. Sometimes I worked with the 7-year-olds as well, depending just on how many children come into the school at that time, because it was always small schools. And then I had an opportunity to join the Education Authority to work as an advisory teacher for early years. And I thought, right, I'll try that for a year. Enjoyed that, and then the following year an opportunity came up for a primary management post, and I had actually been acting principal as well in my teaching side, so I went for that job, got it, and stayed in the Education Authority then for another 11 years. But held 2 responsibilities: primary management, working with school leaders, working with boards of governors, working across sectors, which took me into the health sector, which took me into the private daycares, the preschool environments, and so on. And then in 2007, an opportunity to come up to work in a voluntary organisation in Belfast called the Early Years, the Organisation for Young Children. So I joined them in 2007 and was programme designer for them, and stayed there for 2.5 years and thought, yes, this is great, but I think I want to do something more around development of programs that I will deliver myself, because at that point I was developing programs for 40 odd people to deliver. So it was more about people management at that point. I thought, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to get really focused in on learning and development in settings. So that's what I did. 2009, I went self-employed, and since that I have worked with school leaders. I have been an associate inspector with ETI, which is similar to your KIGRA system. I have worked across all sectors, in voluntary and private, statutory sector. I work with mainly 2-year-olds up right through to age 11. Not with the children, with the adults who actually work with the children. So it's been a wonderful, varied career. I have travelled all over the world, looked at best practice. I have to pinch myself sometimes and think, how did I get here? Because it has just been, I've grabbed every opportunity along the way. So That's where I'm at.
And it's great to hear such diversity, because then you're able to bring all that varied experience to your training or to your like your consulting with educators or parents. But what is the, through all those varied roles then, Claire, what's that value that just keeps you driven throughout all of those different roles? Because obviously there's something there that's driving you to do all this work.
Yeah, so whenever I went self-employed in 2009, I met a lady. Well, I've actually met Jan White. Jan White is an outdoor consultant, and she's based in Sheffield. And I'd worked with Jan along the way at different points. And she contacted me in 2009 to wish me well and say, you know, if you need any help with your self-employment bit, give me a shout and so on. So I really appreciated that. And she did say to me at that time, you know, it'll take you a while to find your niche, what it is that really floats your boat and makes you tick. So, you know, really what it has come down to over those years, because I have distilled that now very, very clearly into how young children learn, how they learn through play. Play is massively important to me, and because I see that as the vehicle for children's learning. But in and around all of that, what has become really a big area for me of focus is observation and assessment of learning. And I don't mean just through play, it's learning in every shape and form. So how do we observe that? How do we know what's happening? How do we move the children from A to B? How do we move ourselves alongside the children from A to B? And then outdoor learning has become an amazing sort of space for children to learn and thrive. And actually, since COVID, we have actually recognised that 100%. Prior to COVID, we were really trying to do a lot of work outdoors, but we couldn't really get the teachers to buy into it. And then COVID happened. And I know this sounds weird, but whenever COVID happened, I was going, yes, we're going to because this is a great opportunity now to say, do you know what? Inside's not working at the minute. We need outside. And once teachers got outside, my goodness me, but they have really started to understand the power of this. So we have a really fabulous kind of movement going on here at the moment in the north, probably, and in the south. Where teachers are really beginning to see how children's brains are wired up and how the outdoor environment strengthens all of that wiring and then makes the children much more available to learn whenever they return back into the classroom. So that's my big driver at the moment.
Fabulous. And there's massive, I thought myself as an outdoor nature specialist, there was massive push, obviously COVID era. And while before COVID, outdoor play, we were aware of the benefits and we could understand the importance of it. I did not see that push that we saw post-COVID, and obviously you've touched on that. So in that push post-COVID, what kind of areas of practice did you see kind of boom or flourish kind of overnight?
So definitely the outdoor learning, that was a massive shift. We also have had industrial action here in Northern Ireland where teachers haven't been engaging with the inspection services and so on for about 6 years, but that has all now just been resolved. But in that 6-year period, I worked with some schools who were very keen to forge ahead. And so they all worked within the sort of the realms of industrial action, but they still brought me in to focus on play and play outdoors in particular. And what we have seen through that 6-year period is a huge shift in the children. Whenever the inspection services got back into those schools again, that was the first thing they noted, was the absolute joy it was to watch the children both outside at play, but even more so whenever they came back in, they could see how the children were settled, but not just in how they were settled to learning, it was the quality of the learning that's beginning to happen as a result of the play outside. We have some examples of literacy, children writing at the end of year 2, which is our 5 to 6-year-olds, independent emergent writing coming through based on their exploration of supernatant fluid in the mud station outdoors. Now, who would not be impressed with that? It really has been an amazing journey to watch this, how this is all unfolding in a very practical way. So, and the teachers are thriving on it. Teachers are coming back to me and saying, I kind of nearly wanted to move up the school because I didn't like play. I didn't really understand it, but now I'm going nowhere. I'm staying here. I totally get this now. I think there probably was a bit of misunderstanding about what play is. And a lot of teachers have been trying to build their play programs around topics. And topics tend to be contrived and superficial. And you find people putting dinosaurs in the sand and dinosaurs in the water area and painting dinosaurs and building caves for dinosaurs. And all those things are fine, but they're not really natural play. That's not what we're about. And once teachers have moved past that to a much more child-centered play environment, then the world just opens up both for the children and the teachers. It's transformational actually to watch it.
And I have to draw on the structured activities part, because obviously with this podcast we're kind of dismantling the normalized practices that are quite rigid. And I think what part of the benefit of and the change in the view of outdoor play, a lot of it was actually about before, where educators may have seen outdoors as a break, a break from the planning or a break from the work or a break from the structure. And that's actually one of the things that I was really interested in with the outdoor play, was the fact that children seemed to enjoy it more because of that freedom, but because it seemed more child direct, because the educators were looking at it as, well, it's a break. I can just stand and I'll talk to my colleagues and, we'll take a step back. But there is that shift now where educators, like you've mentioned, are more aware of the play benefit and the learning that can come from it, that can support indoor and outdoor learning together. And then what ends up happening is educators are more fulfilled. I think that view of play now for outdoors is more recognized as, it's not just a break. Like, it never was just a break. It certainly wasn't for the children, but it's that shift in mindset of educators going, this can actually really support children all across the board. And I wonder, have you seen any, particularly then with staff, of their mindset, but also their well-being? And the reason I'm asking that is I would have seen myself, you would have staff who in COVID were just firstly kind of thrown outside fully without any, awareness or any understanding, but they actually noticed themselves, having talked to educators. One thing that struck me was one educator said she was taking less paracetamol every day, because she said indoors she was constantly getting headaches. She'd go home, she'd need to be in a dark room. And she said that's the first thing she noticed when she was fully outdoors. I didn't need as much paracetamol to manage migraines and headaches, which she thought was her own, health issue, but it was actually an environmental issue that she then realized post-COVID, which if COVID didn't happen, she mightn't have realized that was a thing. So even that benefits for staff were massive. Is there anything that you would have seen there as well, Claire? Like,
absolutely. Absolutely. Whenever I'm training teachers in outdoor learning, what I do is we do a little bit of an introduction indoors. This is what this is about. I generally talk about the physical benefits for children whenever they're outside. We look at proprioceptive development. We look at the vestibular development, the cross-lateral movement, and why those are incredibly important for young children in helping to wire up the brain neurons for them as well. So we start with that, and then I go outside with the adults and we engage in practical experiences, so that first of all, they get outside in the fresh air, and then they actually get to experience mud, for example. I bring in, whenever I go to training, my car's packed to the gills. And so we have our planks, I have trestles, there'll be different props for setting planks on top of, and so on. And we make mud stations. And one of the key messages there for the adults is you do not need to buy a mud kitchen to do mud play. So that's the first thing. You do not need to spend lots and lots of money, nor do you need a garden to do this. And so I can rock up to training in a very small schoolyard, which is just a bit of tarmac, and open up the boot, and out comes the planks and whatever else it takes to set up this station. So we set up the station, and I will have a small bucket of mud with me, or soil. It's actually garden soil. And I get the teachers to play with that, to experience it.
Mm.
And they're going, is she for real? Is she really going to make us do that? And I'm going, yeah, I am. Because what I want them to do is feel what children feel. And all of a sudden, they start mixing a little drop of water into soil, and then they mix. And then the next thing, everybody goes dead quiet. So I just kind of absorb this and say, so what's happening here? And they're saying, gosh, this is really therapeutic. And I'm saying, yes. So they do that, and then what I give them another opportunity to do once they've done that individual bit, I get them to build their own mud stations and then bring in that element of their role play into it. Now, I never impose role play on children. I know children have role play in here. They base their role play on what they know about. So children will very quickly build McDonald's, nail parlors, hairdressing salons. Last week, very interestingly, one group of children made a charity shop in their mud station.
Oh, wow.
Because that's what we experience now. We don't know about travel agents or post offices anymore, so there's no point in doing that and play. Let the children take the role play forward. So this is what adults are experiencing, and we have lots of little baskets and things in the boot of my car for training. And they head off foraging for leaves and petals and twigs and sticks, bring it back to their mud stations, and they can become whatever they want them to be. And the adults at the end of a session, they could be there for an hour, experiencing everything that children experience. Then what we do is we evaluate the learning against an acronym called SPICE, which is your social, physical, intellectual, communication and language, and emotional feelings, emotional learning. So I will get them to dissect all the learning that has just happened in their group by themselves using the SPICE acronym. And then we come back inside again, and they're all bubbling with excitement. And I'm like, so what made this excitement happen? What made you so fresh and alert? And they said, well, first of all, the fresh air. Secondly, the freedom to move around a space. You let us design our own spaces. You sent us foraging in nature. And also, sometimes whenever I drive up to schools, I take a quick look around and I say, there's not enough a lot here, but actually there's lots there. There is lots of stuff that you can forage, even if it's just a hedge or something very, very simple, or a wee bit of grass somewhere that you can just snip off. That's enough to bring to your mud station. And the other big message, just whenever I'm talking about mud stations, is we're not talking about mud kitchens where children cook and make buns and make stews. And I think that's the biggest mistake that we make as adults. We move in and say to the children, well, what are you making today? You're making a pie. They're not making pies. They're actually studying the change in materials. They're studying the science of the material, why the water has absorbed so much but the mud won't absorb any more water into it. And the children are waiting and watching this sort of trickle. And children could watch that for quite a long time. And there we are, jumping in, pecking at them and saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? Come and do this, come and do this, come and make a pie. Instead of taking time to observe the children and see what exactly are they doing? What are they thinking about? So I'm kind of going off on a big tangent here, Chloe, but that's what makes me tick. That's what makes the adults tick. Once they start to see that's what learning looks like, they have no fear of going outside because now they know. Now they use SPICE to evaluate the learning, and then they come back in and think, that was good. And like the teacher I'm saying that was able to take the writing forward with her year 2 children, then it's just magic. It's pure magic.
There's so much I want to draw on, but I have to, just with that mud kitchen example, I can see it as you described it really, really clearly. It's that adult pecking at children, just putting in it, and even the language you use, like it's very clear that the language is us as adults, we're already making it a product-based activity. We've decided, well, what are you producing? What are you making, rather than just what are you experiencing? And like everything that you've just described with the staff, the adults, that was not about product. That wasn't what are you making. It was all about your experiences and everything that they said they felt. I also love the fact, Clare, as well. It's just about getting adults back in touch with being a child.
Yeah.
Because that's the disconnect, isn't it? Essentially, like if adults aren't valuing play, it's because they forget the value that they got from it when they were a child themselves. So that hands-on practical experiences for adults may have been the only time they've ever actually had the space to actually engage in deep play. And I think that would be the benefit of that training that you're delivering for adults. Is it's such a busy world. Like, we know outdoor play is decreasing. We know technology is making people more sedentary, especially with smartphones. So like, as an adult, to be able to take part in something that even says, look, just take an hour and just mess with mud. Like, the value in that for an adult's mindset is going to be so much more empowering than telling an adult, yeah, you need to have a designated mud kitchen for children to cook in.
So the other thing that we will say as well to adults is, look, sometimes whenever I'm at training, adults fear mud play, they fear the mess and so on. And then I sometimes very boldly just have a lunchbox with me with soil in it. And I'd say, but this is all we need. You don't need a field full of mud. So let's go outside and set up our bench, which is why I love the planks. And just set up the planks on top of a couple of tires, set out my lunchbox. Then I have some pipettes and some turkey basters, some very tiny little trinket boxes and things, and small spoons. And I'd say, you can do mud play like this. If you have children with additional needs, if you have children who are on the autistic spectrum, they love this little individual space. It's small, it's their space. They don't, and you can set it wherever you want it to be. It doesn't have to be in the traditional mud kitchen area. So if you have a child who needs their own space, you create this space in this area for them, and don't put too many pieces of equipment on the space. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. To give them time just to work at their level and at their and in that space. I think we just need to get better at really tuning into our children to see what it is that they need, what makes them tick, how can we make this better for them. And actually, whenever you make it better for them, your life as a teacher, as an educator, becomes a very different experience. You don't need paracetamol.
Exactly.
You're smiling, you know.
Mm-hmm. And I need to draw as well, Claire, on what you've said there about you don't need that much stuff. I've seen in practices, outdoor spaces, they are cluttered so much with just equipment. Like, you're talking slides and big sand pits, but also within the sand pit, there's no space to actually engage with the sand because it's full of buckets and shovels and just excessive amount of stuff, especially plastic-based stuff. And I know seeing children navigate these spaces, it's actually very stressful because they're trying to make their own space to engage in deep play while also navigating other children doing the same thing in essentially what might be a very small space. You know, you've described urban areas. I know I've seen areas that maybe they just have a concrete kind of corridor alongside a building. So making sure as well that, you know, adults are being aware that you don't have to fill a space with more stuff for it to be engaging. If anything, we need to normalize empty space. Yeah, you know, that empty space. Then I even think I can imagine just coming in with just an empty space and a lunchbox of mud. Mm-hmm. That would pass hours. Not only for the children, but the adults, absolutely. And it's these really simple, practical pieces that we need to advocate more for because they're not expensive, and they also make sure that it's not product based. You know, you're not focusing on your output.
Yeah. I think you need to also be very aware of the age and stage of the children that you're working with. And if children are very much in that schematic stage of development, you need to know what schema is, what it is that children are particularly interested. Like, if it's trajectory and that pouring and flow and movement, then all you need is some sand, and, you know, where they can pour it down tubes and watch that. That will fascinate those children for long enough. As you say, small is beautiful, less is more. But it's about understanding, why are we doing this? What is the learning intention up front? Be very clear about that, rather than starting with, well, here's the resources and here's the equipment. What can we do with that? That's coming at it from the wrong perspective. You need to come at it from the child. What is it that we need to do in order to move this child forward? Which is why then less is more in terms of equipment. Yeah, we have a school that I work with, and during COVID as well, the head teacher rang me up and said, look, Claire, whenever the children come back, we want a really good sand area for the children. The Department of Education here had given some funding to buy materials to support health and well-being. And she very quickly thought, you know what, I don't need books to support health and well-being. I need a space. So her and I and one of our teachers and the school secretary got together and we planned out a quarry, a big open sand pit, which was just dug into the grass. It's quite big. 15 children can go to it and are very comfortable in it. The only thing that we do not allow in that space are buckets and spades and dumpers and diggers and tractors and lorries. You know the image. None of that plastic is allowed to this space. What we want the children to do in this space is to be in an area of almost nothing. There are stones there. The stones are the size of your hand. They're quite big stones, to give children an opportunity just to be in a space where there is nothing, and you have to then come up with your own ideas of what you do there. The children go on rotation to this space over a 2-week cycle. When it's their turn to go to the quarry, they are so excited. And I'm like, yep, and there's nothing there, only the sand and the stones. Now, don't get me wrong, we do tune into the curriculum as well. So, for example, if in an 8-week block in the maths curriculum, they're looking at measures and size, what we will do then is bring like different big pipes and tubes and so on, and funnels and different sizes of sort of big builder's yard type equipment. We bring that to the quarry so that children can talk about long pipes, short pipes, wider pipes, narrow pipes. Sometimes whenever the children arrive in the quarry, the pipes are standing vertical, pushed into the ground, into the sand. So then we don't talk about long and short, we talk about tall and short. And the children then, the play changes because of the way the invitation has been set up. The children then start to fill these poles or tubes, and then the whole dilemma is, how do we get this lifted off? Do we need help? Do we need to work as a team? And then if the sand is damp, really nice and damp, it holds its form. But if it's really dry, then it just pours out again. So this is how the children then started to investigate the change in materials, what makes the material different, rather than saying, this week we're doing wet sand, this next week we're doing dry sand in the classroom, which is really a very difficult way to do that. I always say, whenever you're outside, let nature dictate when we do wet and dry sand. Let the children discover what they can actually do with the damp sand. We've a whole project where children spent weeks in that sand area building bridges with the sand.
And I wonder then, Clare, is like with children, I just have this gorgeous image of children just running and flocking to this quarry. I wonder, is that the excitement, is the fact they don't have to worry about being told what to do, they don't have to worry about everything being planned or micromanaged for them. Essentially, I wonder, is that's that thrill of, this is my space now.
Yeah, and probably I think probably a lot of this came as well if you watch children go to the beach, to the seaside. They get out of their car, and I watched children one day get out of their car, and the minute they got out of the car, they ran to the water. And then they stopped at the water, and then they ran back to the car, and I thought, what are they doing? They didn't have anything with them, but what are they doing? And they rummaged through the car for quite some time, and then they got a Tesco bag, and they ran back to the water, and they filled up the Tesco bag and brought it back to the car. And I thought, all right, they had no buckets, they had no way of transporting the water, but they came up with their own way. And I just thought, there is exactly what we want children to do. We want them to think creatively and critically through what to do when we don't have all these fancy, as you say, kind of products to work with, which maybe only do one thing or two things and take children down a certain direction. Children are very resourceful if we give them those opportunities. So, yeah.
And I think it's also teaching for us as adults, because if we don't make that empty space, like you said, if you have an environment that doesn't have a lot in it, I'm imagining, just even being a previous educator, there is that panic of, oh, is there not enough for them? Or, I need to give them more, am I not doing enough? Or, you do have that internal dialogue thinking, am I not producing enough? And I think that's where we need to kind of stop ourselves and realize if children are in deep play with what they have, to immerse in that and then allow the child to direct like that. If they need more poles or pipes, or maybe they're exploring, well, how would this be lifted? Okay, well, maybe let's look at another tool or another resource then, but not necessarily just plastering that environment with all the things that you think they will need at all times. They may just need one piece of equipment, that maybe a Tesco bag, so that's exactly what I think drawing from it.
And that's what we did with the quarry. Whenever we realized, what, the children, they do need some water here, and we identified that. So we got a couple of water butts, put them into the space. We don't have enough rain actually to fill those butts, believe it or not. But so the caretakers run a hose down the Monday morning, fill up the water butts for us, and then they have their water. The other thing that I am particularly interested in is this notion of boutiquing, and it's a name I have given to organisation of resources in the different areas, particularly outdoors. If you want to know more about that, actually, you can go onto my website, and there's a free video on boutiquing. So it's in the online sessions part. It's something that I did last year, but it is a game changer in terms of how we set up outdoor experiences. And I think you might be able to see the quarry in that as well. But we set up the water butts and then the storage unit so that we can keep some bits and pieces that we know children regularly look for in that area. And the other thing that we want to always have is access to writing materials in each of the areas. So in that sort of storage container, there'll be markers, there'll be scrap bits of cardboard, there'll be string, there's scissors, so that if children make something in the sand area and they want to label it, they can do that. So that it's not about us saying, oh, go now and put this sign on that. They do it themselves because they know the materials are there and they're used creating signage like do not enter or boys only, or they have all sorts of little messages that they want to put out. In fact, one of the children one day had made a treasure map, and then the children were in the sand sort of digging for treasure based on his map. So it's it's just making sure that they have the tools in the right place at the right time. So that's what boutiquing is all about. So it's interesting.
Well, I'll definitely link to that, because I think that sounds like an important resource, and the fact that it's a new term that people can kind of draw from, because I think we're quite saturated in hearing the same terms over and over, that some of them have kind of lost their meaning. So to kind of get that revamp of language would be great for adults.
That's just kind of term that I give because I love going to boutiques. And why do I like boutiques? Because I can see what I want, try it on. If I don't like it, put it back. And this is what I want the children to do too. See what you want, try it out. If it doesn't work, put it back, try something else. Instead of us, the adults, controlling what children play with, which is traditionally what happens. If you're doing a topic, well, we're only going to give you this equipment, so you play with that. Whereas what we are doing in schools here is creating what's known as our continuous provision, both inside and outside, boutiquing the areas as best we possibly can. And then what we do is we enhance those areas every half term based on the curriculum plans, for example, the measures. In the next curriculum plan, if we're looking at shape, then we go around all of our areas and we make sure, have we got as much sort of equipment in these areas that will promote conversation around 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional shapes. And so that's how we enhance the spaces. But the initial setup is to make sure that the areas are as good as they possibly can be in each of those sort of ingredients of play, both inside and outside.
And I wonder, Clare, just listen to you linking it to the curriculum, because obviously we know the curriculum is typically designed or driven by adults, but obviously there's certain measures that need to be hit, or, we've learning outcomes and goals that are supporting, children's play. And sometimes children's play can get lost within kind of those structures. But what you're describing is it's almost like that those learning goals or curriculum outcomes, they're coming second. Because first you're providing that fueled environment that children are leading the way in, and they will say, or they will lead out on the topics and areas that they want to go into. But say, for example, Claire, you are looking to, as adults, your intention is for children to learn more about, say, size or weight or shape. But say if you have children that don't want to engage with that, is there flexibility to move away from that? Is there, how would you work or navigate that for practice?
Absolutely. Play is play. Play should come from the children. That's intrinsically motivated, and that's where the best play happens. And whenever children are in control of that, that's where they become most involved in their play, and that's where the deepest level learning takes place, which we know. But we're quite cute about how we do this, Chloe. It's kind of not a free for all. So what I do first with teachers is I will say to them, and particularly with the preschool, because we still have our curriculum here for preschool right through. I'd say to them, let's take a look at the curriculum. Let's look at the long-term plans for each of our 6 curriculum areas. Let's look at the ingredients that we have in each of our play spaces. Have we got as much as we possibly can get into those areas that will inform children's thinking and promote curriculum thinking as well in those spaces in a playful way? So we do that from the very outset. The spaces are not just set up randomly because we've seen something nice on Pinterest. It's very carefully, what do we need in these spaces? Then the children do what children do. Children know instinctively how to play. So then we stand back and we let the children play. And then what we do is we know if we're doing something in the classroom to do with measures, then we can actually draw that language out, because with the best will in the world, the children are doing those things anyway. They're building a den, they're putting a tarp over the top of it. They're talking about, we need a bigger tarp. This one's too small. We know then that's how you move in and support the language and the thinking. Can you get a bigger one? How are we going to know which one's going to fit? Will we just estimate it? We use language like that. And again, in the Loose Parts Boutique, which you will see on the boutiquing video, you'll see children managing the den building poles in the boutique, how to lift them out of the container. That's not just random. That's not just by chance that happens. We spend time with those children talking to them about, when you're lifting the pole, we need you to look around, make sure there's nobody beside you, so that we're making them spatially aware, which is part of your maths and your physical curriculum. Can you lift your pole upright? Hold it vertical so that you don't poke somebody with it. Do not carry it horizontally. And this is with our nursery and year 1 children, giving them those mathematical terms right from the beginning. Because again, we believe that if children can talk about Tyrannosaurus and Stegosaurus, they can talk about vertical and horizontal. So we have the children saying, oh, right, I'm carrying this pole, and you will see it in the video, on the pictures. And it's not completely vertical and it's not horizontal. And the children have a great debate about that. You're not carrying that vertical, but it's not horizontal. And somebody stepped in and said, it's diagonal. These are our babies. And I'm like, yes, they know. And this is where we need to make sure we've got the right equipment to promote all of that. So it is kind of which goes first. Yes, our observations of children, curriculum, it's both. And I always say the people who designed our curriculum and your Ashton program, they are experts in their field. They know what to put into this. So I'm more than happy to follow their guidance on that, get the area set up, and then follow the children. And it's like a dance between the children and the adult. But it's about being very clear about what your curriculum is and your knowledge of child development. So once you've got that clear in your head, your world becomes so much easier with the children and so much better for children.
I think that example you've given is really clear about the measuring of the poles, balancing the poles, the spatial awareness. I think as well, it's educators and adults in general just realizing that is learning in itself. That, as you said, that doesn't just come by fluke. There's planning and there's language involved in that, because exactly as you've described, Claire, if you have children engaging in an activity that's to do with measuring or weight or length or comparison, you can, yes, come in with the language that's going to support them in developing that critical thinking further. But to be aware for adults and educators listening to this, that's not interfering, that's scaffolding. Because you're scaffolding that language by saying, instead of saying, where they learn to use the word, say, estimating, or what weight is, by experiencing it. So I think that's a really good example for everyone just to think about, how adults trying to balance between understanding what interfering in children's play is and also what scaffolding children's play is, and finding that balance, because it can be quite a subtle balance between finding that quite niche area. But I find that
tricky for adults. Especially if somebody's watching them, they're afraid to stand back. And I'm like, just, stand back and count to 10 even, but don't count, just, listen to your children for 10. Watch your children for 10. Again, year one children, these are 4 and 5 year olds, were building a throne for the king and queen one day. And they had crates and they were putting the crates on top of each other. And Benedict stands on top of the crates and he wobbles and he says, these are not stable. We need to stabilize these. And I'm like, yeah, these are 4 and 5 year olds stabilizing. And I'm like, yeah. So if we were trying to push them down a route, they wouldn't tell us what they know. We wouldn't get that from them. So what they did, and they went back into the Loose Parts Boutique and they got den building poles and pushed them in through the crates to stabilize them. And I thought, yeah, that's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. So
and they came through that themselves. That's through their exploration.
No adult input at all. The only time then what we will do with that is take a couple of photographs, and I encourage the teachers then to bring those back inside into the classroom. So that's the linkage. We'd be saying to them, okay, bring those back in. Those are your teachable moments inside. Don't kill the children's play outside by taking it too formal. I always say whenever I'm doing training, don't suck the children's souls out by killing the joy. So bring those photographs back in and say, look, we saw you doing this. This was really good. Heard you talking about trying to stabilize this, and you got it stabilized with the den building poles. And that becomes the plenary session. Instead of saying to the children, what did you make? What did you make? Just hone in on one big concept. And every day there's a big concept. And the teachers are getting really good at picking those up. And those are then what very often will lead the children into the literacy. And again, if you think about your literacy curriculum, 1/3 of the curriculum in literacy for our infants is talking and listening, speaking to an audience, retelling in sequence, which is your plenary session. And that's the bit that feeds the plenary, is the play experience that comes from in here. Children's plenary sessions are just amazing whenever you ask them, so why did you put those poles in? Why did the queen get the wee bumpy chair and the queen and the king got the big throne? So then we get into gender stereotypes. So it's not just about long and short. We dig deeper than that. We start to look at what are the big concepts that are coming out of this play.
That's just wonderful, Claire. And I can imagine the children and the staff benefit so much from that lens, because the great thing listening to your stories is they're not complicated. And I think that's what listeners will appreciate. They're not complex, they're not expensive. You don't need all this in-depth planning. Of course, you're having the ongoing discussions, but they're invaluable anyway to enhance your practice. You're doing it with adults and you're doing it with children. But what I do want to ask, Claire, as well, because all of this is, you can tell all of the exciting work that you're engaging in and how everything's progressing so much for these schools that you're working with. But I am curious to know, is there any practices that you've seen over the years that kind of are normalizing, concerning for you in terms of thinking of like that baby jail approach, practices that maybe we're still normalizing, still engaging with, but we find that, they're not enhancing anything. If anything, they're just more, surveillance or structure that's limiting play.
So a lot of my work is spent in schools. Do train a lot of training in schools as well as online training, which is great. It's nice to have a mix of both. But it's the work in schools that gives me my oxygen and my understanding of where practitioners are. And it is a bit scary. More often than not, I go into classrooms that are for our younger children, our nursery children, which are 3 and 4 year olds, and then into our year 1 classrooms. And they are table and chair dominated. So they are like, I'm kind of standing looking and thinking, this is like a year 7 classroom. Tables and chairs. These are 4 and 5 year olds who I said at the very beginning of this conversation about the need for cross-lateral movement, vestibular development, and proprioception. And I'm looking at this room and thinking, so where is the stuff for children to engage with? Where's the materials? Where's the softness? Where's the joy in the space? So that is still very much to the fore, Chloe. It's not a case of every school has moved on to the ones that I've just described for you. So what I need to start to do with those settings is say, look, I think we need to look at your environment. We need to strip out these tables and chairs. Let's take them all out. So actually at the end of June, I'm going back out to a school to do this, remove everything from the classroom, because very often practitioners, teachers can't see the wood for the trees. They're in the room, they do not know how to take that apart and start again, because it is massive. It's a massive task. But what we do is we just strip it out and say, right, let's look at what do children need here. Children need to move. Children need a safe space to go whenever they just need time out. So they need a comfortable space. Children need a space to meet and greet and have a conversation, to speak to an audience, to learn how to talk and listen, to have their story, and so on. Children need a space to make marks, to start early mark making and early writing. Children need a space to build and think mathematically and think technically. So with those kind of experiences that we know are good for children, then we should be setting up their room around that type of approach. Now, this year I've done that with a couple of schools mid-year, which was really tricky. The couple of the adults were quite resistant, saying, no, we've always done it this way. The children need to line up here. The children come and sit here and do this. And we put our jigsaws on this table, and we put our Duplo on this table, and we do our dough on this table. And I'm saying, but that's you, the adult, setting that up every single day. And you're talking to me about children's behaviour being a bit concerning and so on. And so I say, look, just give me a chance. Let's work through this. So I show them some fabulous images of environments that we've worked with. And so they say, right, let's give it a go. Now, 9 times out of 10, I'm in there with the adults, sleeves rolled up, moving the stuff with them.
Yeah.
Because I think it's hard for people to see it, hard for them to understand unless they've been in that situation. So we change the environment, and then I say to them, right, let's look at how the children now come into this space. I want you to back off, not be setting out the jigsaws. Don't be setting out the Duplo, because now you have a fabulous construction area. Now you have a fabulous mark making space. Now you have a fabulous creative space, a fabulous role play area, a fabulous dress up area. All of that continuous provision is in place. You've thought about the learning that you want to happen in those areas through the materials that you've put into those spaces. Now you stand back and let the environment and the materials do their job. Watch the children. And the adults will ring me up a couple of days later. Some of them are in tears, because they're like, wow. And I'm like, yep. How easy is that now for you? Now you can observe your children. Now you have time to sit down with children, talk to them. Now you have time for a cup of tea in the role play area with them. It just transforms. It transforms the adults' understanding. They tell me it transforms children's behavior, and I'm saying, no, it does not transform the children's behaviour was fine. It was what we were doing in the first place in terms of the environment that was making the children out of sync, restless, bored, anxious, not knowing how to behave in this space. Whereas if you have the environment completely set up in this continuous way with lots of rich, stimulating experiences, the children know instinctively what to do. They find something to do. Instead of us controlling, now we're going to this table, now we're going to that table, now we're going here, now we're going there, which is full of transitions. And children at that early stage don't cope well with transition. Too many transitions makes children kind of get unsettled and so on. So that's another thing I do with adults, is say, let's reduce the number of transitions that are in place here. One of the schools that have very successfully done this in the last 2 years, they changed their environment inside. Their outside environment was beautiful. The children arrived in the morning, and again, I was there with them at the very beginning of the year, and I watched the children coming in, 26 of them, 3-year-olds. And I thought at the end of the session, oh my word, what are we going to do here? 9 of the children had extreme needs, additional needs, profound, complex needs. It was actually quite frightening. So I said to the teacher, what we're going to have to do is really rethink the whole structure of the day here. Rather than trying to make the children fit our model, I said we need to meet the children where they're coming from. So what we did, we switched the routine completely. The children arrived in the morning. They didn't come into the building. They went straight outside. The parents were used with that. So the parents brought the children suited and booted and left any little comfort toys or anything in a little station that we had set up outside. Children then stayed about an hour and 10 minutes outside. Then I was back again with my mentoring hat on and watched the children coming from inside or from outside to inside. And again, things kind of broke down a wee bit. So I said, you know what, this is too much. 26 children returning from outside to inside at the one time is too much. So again, that's where children's behavior becomes kind of out of sync again. The children are restless. We, the adults, get stressed and so on. So we put in place a very simple routine. 9 children come in with an adult, wash their hands, go to the bathroom or whatever, set the table for snack routine with the adult. It's like a family occasion. It's beautiful. They have their snack. And once they're sitting at the table and the other adults outside can see what's going on, they then bring the next 9 children in. They go wash their hands, get themselves organized. And at that point, some of the children have already finished their snack and they're moving seamlessly to the continuous provision that is now in place. So they can go into the block area, they can go into the creative zone, they can go into the role play. We don't have to set anything up. Everything is there. So then that group of children then switch just seamlessly. And it doesn't, if there's 11 children, we just squeeze in another 2 chairs. There's nobody saying, oh, you can't come here, there's no room. It's just make it work. And the last group who are outside are the ones who are there. They help the adults tidy up. So they have a clear purpose outside. They're also the children who the adults know won't be really hungry at that stage. So they kind of think, which children need what. So again, we're completely tuned into children. What do the children need? Instead of how can we make this work for us, the adults? It's what do the children need? And once you address that need, I think then that whole baby jailhouse notion disappears. That just really is no longer an issue. It's beautiful actually to watch it. It's really lovely.
You described it literally. You're unlocking that baby jail approach. Yeah. With very little, as I say, like it doesn't require a lot to do. It's very much in the mindset and the mind, but also the way you've described, I think quite simply, realizing you can get rid of tables and chairs because if you think of the outdoor space, it's not full of tables and chairs. So that's obviously part of the desire and the space that children engage with. And then if you replicate that in the indoors, I mean, to be honest, Claire, one of my biggest issues with the indoor and outdoors is we're trying to make the outdoors more like the indoors by bringing out the library, bringing out the kitchen, and it's replicated. But why? When exactly as you've described, you're actually going to bring in some of the positives and the benefits from outdoors indoors. So like that, get rid of the tables and chairs, make more space for physical movement, and then naturally, like you said, you can never blame children's behavior. Children's behavior is in response to the environment. Yeah.
Now we don't get rid of all of our tables and chairs. We make quite a big space for the creative area. So what I had done in that school was, instead of having 6 different formations of tables in the room, we pull them together and make one massive long space for creativity. And then we put really large sheets of paper on those spaces so that children work together on a space, so that we develop social skills, language skills, instead of having children doing individual pieces of work in a station. Because once you give them out A4 sheets of paper or A3 sheets of paper, it becomes individualized, it becomes end product driven. It's about something that you put on the wall or take home or whatever. And whenever you put this large sheet of paper, it is purely experiential. It is process driven. It is where the adult is, and there's lots of language about, the long line, the thick line, the short line, the spiky line, and so on. So there's all sorts of language going on there, and that's our job is about teaching. And that's what those affordances do, and that's how the room makes that happen, both inside and outside. But you also touched on that, taking inside stuff outside. Again, I will say to adults, you should not be taking anything outside. Nothing. If you look at your painting outside, or your creative work outside, what can we use? So again, I'd be saying to practitioners, come on, tell me the different things we can use for outdoors. Soil and water, different consistencies. We can have thick paint, thin paint, watery paint. You can use leaves, twigs, stones, chalks, water, sand. And so that's enough for creativity. You don't need to bring all your paints, all your writing materials, all your paper outside. So again, really thinking through what does the environment afford us. And if you don't have those very fancy environments, then you have to collect those items over time. You have to collect baskets of sticks and twigs, and the children get used with that too, and so do the parents. And the parents will land in with a bag of beech nuts or pine cones or whatever, because they know what you're doing.
I think as well what you've just hit on is you've not just cultivated curriculum in the school, but you've cultivated a love of learning in life, because when they're not in school, they're potentially thinking of, oh, I can use this in my play outdoors tomorrow, or so they're already gathering that stuff with the mindset of. But it also, Claire, it makes people, for adults and for children, very mindful, you know, to be very present, not just in the environment, in school environments, but outside of school in real life, as in, there's a lovely stick that I'd love to show to my friends, or that could be used as a mark maker. So you're bringing that lens of mindfulness to be aware of, well, what does my current environment have that I can use to engage in that deep play? And I think that's really a vital piece of information for listeners listening today, because that's something that, again, it's quite simple. And I do find that with mindfulness, some people might find that word in itself quite intimidating, because I don't want to go down that route. But being aware that it's more than just that mindfulness. It's about recognizing, well, what you have now, and let's maximize what you have now without feeling like you need to put more into it. So I think definitely you've drawn on so much. And, you know, I think the biggest piece is not bringing that indoor environment outside, you know, not saturating the outdoor environment, but actually recognizing what's the benefit to the outdoors as it is. And what would you say then, Claire, for listeners that, you know, they want to do all this? So say maybe for outdoors, they want to be able to maximize what they have, but maybe they have very little, or they're indoors and they feel like, yes, I'd love to get rid of the tables and chairs, but maybe I'm not allowed. So those kind of scenarios, what kind of advice would you have for practitioners that would love to be able to go down that route, but maybe are a bit fearful?
So I think they need to be very clear about the learning program. So if they're in a setting where they have a curriculum, which most of us do have, you need to be very clear having that up front. So I always put the curriculum up front. And then how you're setting up your environment to respond to the curriculum and to respond to the children. And again, if you can show your leaders and managers, this is the curriculum, this is how it happens, this is what it looks like. For example, if you think about the creative space, massive table, you think about your snack routine table, your dining and socializing table, we call it. And if you think about that in itself, dining and socializing is learning life skills, personal, social, and emotional development. It's physical skills, it's language and literacy, communication, talking and listening. If you can demonstrate that for your leaders, I think they will be more than happy to let you pull that into one big space and then have your creative space, which again looks at maths, language, it's science, because we're talking about mixing colors, how we mix them and so on. There's so much can be done at each of those spaces. You don't need a space then for jigsaws, and you don't need a space for Duplo, because if you have a construction area, that's where the children are going to be building anyway, and that's where your maths, your science, and so on happens. I think it's about how we articulate that back to our leaders, to say, you know, I'm not putting all of my tables and chairs out, but I'm just going to reconfigure this classroom slightly differently. Again, I have one classroom where we work and there's 26 children there, and they have dinner in the classroom, so they need their tables and chairs. And if you were to look into that room now during their playtime, you'd be saying, now where do they sit for dinner? Because you cannot see the tables and chairs. They are nice and discreetly positioned. That one is a creative zone, one is a big mark making space. There is one table that they wheel in at lunchtime, and that's it. And it's, you know, it's just amazing how that works, rather than having it dominated by tables and chairs all day just because we need dinners served at those spaces, which sometimes happens. Yeah.
I think it's great, Clare, because there's two very key, beyond all the messages that you've delivered, and there's multiple, the biggest thing there definitely is just being able to just try. Like you said, maybe even start with one table and chairs that you can go, look, can we reduce that? Maybe just take it out, or, you know, something, or even just repurpose it so that it's for a different space, or moving it around, that while you mightn't have the space in your service to actually remove tables and chairs, maybe you've no storage, for example, at least then having the space to actually just stand in your room and just look at, well, how can I maximize floor space? And then equally for the outdoors, then it's recognizing, no, I don't need to bring out paint. You know, I don't need to bring out paper. Let me look at what nature can provide in those materials that we can maximize. Clare, this has been fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. The amount of learning that I've got, and I know you have a wealth of practical experiences. I know listeners are going to be so amazed with just the simplicity of being able to just adapt these different approaches, but also being able to recognize that it can be just so simple in terms of expense or recognition of what you have. And I'm sure that if people here today are listening, adapting this into their practice, say on a Monday morning, might realize, I didn't actually know I had that. You know, recognizing that that's been there so long, and it's not till now that I recognize that we had that. So, Clare, thank you so much for being here on Baby Gel Unlocked. We will have to have you again, because we're looking forward to seeing as you progress and all the different practices that you're doing. But also, you said that you have a book in the pipeline, so we'll have to come back and talk about that. Just for a quick snippet, what's that book kind of entailing? Or
well, sure, I'm sitting here. So that's me working on it this week. I had to really take time out to try and get it finished. I have had submitted it through to the publisher for the first time. It's back now with me for edits. It's on observation and assessment. How to do observation and assessment, because I just feel that that is such a minefield. It's a practical manual, and it looks at how to do an observation. Basically, what I have discovered is people don't really write the right things for an observation. They tend to jump past observation and go straight into assessment. And once you do that, you leave your evidence behind. You've negated the evidence, and the evidence is so important. So it's about how that works, and then how we assess all of the factual observations that we have in front of us in order to plan for a more meaningful, enriching experience for the children. And so everything that I've spoken to you about through this podcast is fueled by observation. If we do not know how to observe the children and how to assess where children are, what their understandings are and what their misunderstandings are, then we cannot provide the environments that the children need. So observation is almost pivotal to how this works. So I am hoping that this book will be finished the end of May, back to the publisher, and then it takes about 6 months to have it launched into the bookshelves, I think.
Very exciting. And it'll be a great time of year then to have it out. Well, once it's out, Clare, we will be back to you, because we would love to hear then all about the observations and assessment, even just as a theme itself. I think it would be so invaluable. But even with today, I think we have a lot to digest. And I think straight after this podcast, we all need to at least go out for a walk and just look at, well, what do we have here?
What do we have?
Yeah.
There is much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Clare, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much.